Live. All right, good morning, or good afternoon by this point. Thank you for joining us. My name is Gerardo Interiano, and I'm the Public Affairs Manager for Google here in Texas. It is our honor to be hosting this event here in our space to address an important issue that impacts all of our community. So on behalf of Google, I'd like to welcome U.S. Senator John Cornyn, Comal County DA Jennifer Tharp, U.S. Marshal Robert Almonte, representatives from the Austin Police Department, the Texas Attorney General's Office, and the Governor's Office here in Texas. Please join me in welcoming them. I would also like to thank the Polaris Project, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, and Thorn for being here and for their leadership. Google was founded on the belief that technology can solve many of the world's greatest challenges. It is my belief that there are few more worthy aims than ending human slavery and trafficking. We worked with the Polaris Project, La Strada International, and Liberty Asia to launch the Global Human Trafficking Hotline Network. By connecting global hotlines, the network provides better support for victims and identifies trends and hotspots that help guide prevention and intervention. But our ongoing commitment and collaboration extends far beyond this network. One example is the Google in Residence program, where we send Google engineers on rotation to NCMEC to boost their technical capacity. We recently launched a new feature in search with partners like the Polaris Project, connecting victims of human trafficking with organizations who can actually provide help. When certain keywords are used in search, these features shows hotline phone numbers, operating hours, and easy-to-use text shortcodes. I'm proud to say that it is now available in 12 countries, 14 languages, and led to the opening of at least 24 cases between August and November of last year. Our hope is that this will continue to help human trafficking victims find information quickly and get help. In addition to these commitments, at Google we hold ourselves accountable. We have a zero-tolerance policy for any ad that advertises escort services, prostitution, or other adult sexual services. We fight illegal content and abuse on our platforms, and we don't tolerate employee and supplier conduct that contributes to human slavery or trafficking. I am proud of this work and grateful for organizations like the McCain Institute and Rights for Girls, along with Thorn, NCMEC, and Polaris, who are instrumental in the fight to end human slavery and trafficking. We are humbled by the work that you all do and the strength and hope that you give to survivors and for the legislators who have taken the lead. To talk more about this work, it is my honor to welcome an incredible woman, Malika Saad Assar, to the stage. Please join me in welcoming her.
Thank you all, and thank you, Google, for hosting this wonderful event. You know, we just finished a very sacred weekend of celebrating Passover and Easter. Passover being the celebration of dignity and freedom from slavery, and Easter being the recognition of the hope of rebirth after death, of being an opportunity for resurrection. And I feel like these themes are very much part of how we talk about child trafficking in the United States. Child trafficking is the form of modern-day slavery here. But there's also the possibility of freedom, of hope, of rebirth. And we'll talk about that and reach for that in our conversation today. We will hold the reality that there is slavery that exists among our most vulnerable children, but with that is also the possibility for their freedom and for their hope and rebirth. Here's what we know about child trafficking in the United States. There are at least 100,000 children who are bought and sold here. Most of them are girls between the ages of 12 to 14. And many of them are coming out of our foster care system. These girls are tricked, coerced, manipulated, and sometimes even kidnapped by traffickers. They are sold to at least 10 men every night. And when the girls try to leave, when they try to escape, they are found and tortured, and sometimes worse. I have even seen, and perhaps many of you here also have seen, how to make it clear to the girls that they are property, the girls are tattooed with the names of the traffickers on their bodies. I was in Los Angeles a couple of months ago in a courtroom where a girl who was the age of 15 had on her face, tattooed onto her face, the name of her trafficker. They are branded as property. There is no question here that children who are bought and sold in our country are victims. But the problem is that too often in our language and in law, we treat and name the girls not as victims, but as child prostitutes. And that's why we hear in the media over 5,000 times in the last 5 years the term child prostitute used to describe children who have been bought and sold for sex. It is why in the last year, 1,000 children have been arrested for prostitution, even though many, if not most of them, are of legal age to even consent to sex. And that's why we have the No Such Thing campaign. The Human Rights Project for Girls, Rights for Girls, in partnership with the McCain Institute and with the generous support of Google, has launched the No Such Thing campaign, that there is no such thing as a child prostitute. There are only survivors and victims of child rape. This is the work. It is critical that we recognize that when children are bought and sold for sex, when our children are bought and sold, that it is not about prostitution, it is not about sex work, it is not about vice. This is violence. We must rename and reframe what is happening to our children who are being trafficked as violence, as child rape. And so I urge all of you here to join us in the effort to create a movement to say that there's no such thing as a child prostitute. That we as a community urge that we have the dignity and the justice and all of the protections given to other victims of child violence and child rape accorded to girls and boys who are bought and sold. I urge you to be part of the changing of the law and the language in how we talk about child trafficking victims. And so when we talk about the possibility of change, of hope, of freedom, of seeking out justice, that is why we have Senator Cornyn here with us. It is my deep honor to introduce you to Senator Cornyn. He has been such a powerful, relentless, and courageous leader in the effort to end child sex trafficking in the United States. He has insisted that we recognize that this isn't just a problem that happens in India or Cambodia, but here at home on American soil. And he has been insistent and powerfully insistent in saying that we must end the culture of impunity for those who purchase our children for sex. And so it is my great honor and with great and deep gratitude, I introduce Senator John Cornyn. So thank you for being here.
Thank you for those kind words.
Absolutely. So you are a former Attorney General, a father of 2 daughters, and now a US Senator. And I'm really curious as to what made you take on the issue of child trafficking here in the United States?
Well, I think for me, it was an evolution. Going back to perhaps my time as Attorney General, when one of my responsibilities was to administer the Crime Victims Compensation Fund. And for the first time, had a lot of interaction with survivors groups and great organizations that do wonderful work to help the victims of sexual abuse and like crimes. And then I think also just my exposure to groups like Girls Court in Houston, Texas, where for the first time, it really became plain to me what you have pointed out so clearly, and that is we have made a mistake in treating children as criminals when in fact they are the victims of the crime. And in fact, what we need to do is focus on the impunity, virtual impunity, that is given to the purchasers of those crimes, of the people who paid money for sex for children who are, as you point out, Malika, incapable legally, and certainly as a result of the coercion and undue influence that many adults have on them, they are incapable of granting consent to this sort of activity. So for me, it was an evolution, and I think recognizing that so much of what happens in the sex trade here in America is not, as you point out, not a foreign. This isn't a matter of people coming in from Latin America alone. That happens, yes, and I've met some of the victims who have been trafficked and basically held in bondage in bars in places like Houston and forced to work for their pimps and in virtual slavery. But this is something that happens every day, but frankly beyond the sight and the recognition of most of us. And I guess the thing that makes this so unique is many of the victims are, of course, as you point out, underage girls, 12 to 14, and sometimes they don't regard themselves as a victim until they realize that they can't escape and that they're being exploited and being treated as property rather than a human being.
Right. You know, really before your voice and advocacy on the Hill, when we talked about the issue of trafficking and who the criminal was, we talked about the traffickers. And there was a real push to say we have to create a culture of crime and punishment for what the trafficker does to these kids, right? But we didn't talk about the buyers. You know, so much of the law enforcement and the policy work pivoted towards the traffickers and their culpability. And there was unbelievable silence around the issue of the buyers. We politely call them Johns, a name from the Bible, right? And not a name that signals any harm or wrongdoing. And in our law and policy, certainly in Washington, D.C., there wasn't a conversation around demand, the demand for children for sex. And your presence and what you have been doing on the Hill has changed that. You have really been a champion for talking about how we have to go after demand, how we have to go after the buyers. And I'd love to hear what brought you to that.
Well, I'm fortunate to have great staff who have done very good work in this area and helped me be constructive, I hope. And one of the first pieces of legislation that I introduced did exactly what you said. They didn't treat the John with impunity, but rather pointed them out and fingered them as the trafficker or basically aider and abetter that they are. And what we've tried to do is build on that legislation in the Justice for Victims of Trafficking Act and to go after the profits and the money and to use that money to help rescue these children and to help them begin to heal and to provide in budget constrained times the resources that so many organizations like yours and others that do such great work, but frankly don't have the resources to deal with it. So if we can take the profit out of this, we can go after the people on the demand side and treat them as co-conspirators, which they are in the human trafficking enterprise, then I think we can begin to change this conversation in a way that will help us make good progress.
I think that's right. I mean, there's such an interesting distinction that is made between paying to rape a child and raping a child, right? And part of the work that you are doing is to say there ought to be no distinction.
It's the same thing.
It's the same thing. Exactly right. So let's talk about the internet since we're here at
Right.
Google. Clearly, the internet has been used to exploit and hurt children. And the internet has also been used to be able to create opportunities for protection and intervention and services for children who are vulnerable. And I'd love to hear you talk about how we can use the internet for good and the examples that I know you have been a witness to and part of in being able to harness technology to protect our children.
Well, I'm proud of the fact we're here in Austin, Texas at Google, leading the way in this effort. But my own journey began again back when I was Attorney General, recognizing that so much of crime was encouraged, was marketed on the internet. And indeed, I know it seems almost quaint today, but back when I was Attorney General, starting in 1999, we created the first Texas Internet Bureau, we called it. Like I said, it sounds kind of quaint today. I think Attorney General Abbott, now Governor, now Attorney General Paxton, I think they may call it the Cyber Crimes Unit, something much more cutting edge sounding than the Internet Bureau. But the point is, as you say, the internet has been an incredible invention and creates so much opportunity for us to communicate and to connect, to learn. But also there is this dark side to the internet. And unfortunately, this has allowed the marketing of services in the sex trade and for people to communicate out of sight in a way that most people just simply aren't aware of. So there really is a dark underbelly to this whole enterprise.
There is, and yet there's this other side of being able to think about how can we make sure that we use the tools of technology, Absolutely. Right, to really be able to go after the buyers and to go after the traffickers, and those good actors and those good stories are so important to raise up, and also recognize that those who buy children, whether online or on the streets, cannot enjoy impunity anymore.
Absolutely. As you know, we are constantly having the discussion about, for example, Backspace and other people that advertise provide a platform for people to advertise the sex trade. And of course, we need to make sure that we don't, we operate in a way that respects the rights of people to communicate legitimately and their First Amendment rights online, but also in a way that helps us identify the perpetrator. I think we can strike that balance. We must strike that balance.
I think that's right. So I wanted to talk to you a little bit about the No Such Thing campaign, and this whole issue of how we don't always understand correctly who the child is. That we often talk about the child as a prostitute, that we often criminalize the child. Can you talk a bit about what do we need to do in order to move forward in seeing that there is no such thing as a child prostitute, to really let go of that term, but also that approach to the girl?
Well, I think thanks to your leadership and the good work of literally hundreds of organizations that are committed to this effort, I think we are seeing a cultural shift. I alluded to that at the outset from my own experience with an organization like Girls Court in Houston, creating the services that these juveniles need, these minors need in order to get rescued and heal, and to realize that we can't just solve this problem by going at the supply side. We'd have to go at the demand side. And when there's so much money being spent, how can we take this money and capture it and use it to help the victims? So I think we're beginning to see that shift. And I think a lot of people, for a lot of people, this is an epiphany. When you say there's no such thing as a child prostitute, that starts people thinking, well, that's actually correct. I maybe never thought of it quite in that way, because either they're being coerced or they are minors and incapable under the law of giving consent, even though they themselves may not realize that they are a victim at first. Many of them just simply get trapped, and by the time they realize they have been trapped, it is too late to escape. And so I do think we've seen a cultural shift, and also a different way of looking at it that I think is helping us be more effective.
I think that's right. But you know, it's interesting that even if tomorrow we were able to achieve this fundamental shift in law, in language, that the children who are being bought and sold are victims of child rape, that they are not child prostitutes, we're still in a situation where there are very few places to put girls and boys who are bought and sold. I know that, you know, Congressman Poe, Judge Poe, always says we have more shelters for animals than we have for our children who are trafficked. We simply do not have places to put children who are bought and sold. We don't have safe homes, and we don't have programming. And it's one of the reasons why the JVTA is so important, is because it is an opportunity to talk about the need for services for our children who don't otherwise have services, and that they are children. We are not talking about adults, we are talking about children.
Well, I agree with you. And I think, again, part of what we are doing here today, part of what the passage of the Justice for Victims of Trafficking Act will mean, hopefully for the public at large, is a greater awareness. And so then more resources will be made available. We have taken, from my experience at the Crime Victims Compensation Fund, and used the fines and the penalties paid by some of the people on the demand side to provide up to a $30 million fund, we're hoping, on an annual basis to provide additional services. But if there's one thing that, beyond just sort of the universal recognition that we hope to achieve about this problem, there certainly are constraints associated with lack of access to resources to provide those. There are a lot of people with big hearts, and when they learn about this, they want to help. But I think that will come as a greater awareness occurs.
Well, I've spoken to lots of judges who recognize that the girl in front of them is a victim, and they will say to me, but what do I do with her? If I release her, the trafficker is waiting right there outside of the courtroom. If I return her to a group home, she'll run because of the abusiveness of so many group homes. So jail becomes the only safe option, and jail should never be the safe option for a child who's been abused.
I just have to say a word about my colleague and partner in all this, Judge Ted Poe, from the House of Representatives, is doing great work there. Obviously, it takes a bill that passes both the Senate and the House before we can send it to the President. And I'm proud to be part of what we call the Recovering Judge Caucus in the Senate. We have a handful of us, John Carter, Louis Gohmert, Ted Poe, and others who are former judges. And I like to think that that helps inform some of what we're doing.
Definitely, definitely. So I know it's taken a lot of your time in the last couple of weeks, but the Justice for Victims of Trafficking Act, if you could just say a couple words around what your hope is for the legislation when the Senate reconvenes.
Well, I hope people who are here and people who are watching on the live stream will urge their member of Congress, whether they're senator or their House member, let's get this job done. We got a little bit distracted and stuck on really a side issue. And I think what we've seen is that there isn't any desire really to make this, to relitigate issues that were decided 39 years ago. And we want to maintain the status quo on things like the Hyde Amendment, but then we want to provide the benefits that this bill will provide. And you can imagine my surprise when we were able to get this bill with 200 different organizations like yours and others, law enforcement organizations, support this legislation. We had, I think, 30 co-sponsors in the Senate, and then passed unanimously out of the Judiciary Committee, and all of a sudden this issue seemed to derail us temporarily. But I think there is enough desire on the part of Congress to get this done. And certainly, I think there's great support across the country for this. What we need to do is simply get it done, and get it done next week is my hope.
Right. You know, when there was all of this strong bipartisan support, we kept asking the press to do a story about the amazing bipartisan support. And it's a shame that the press is now, when there's a little bit of tension between the Democratic and Republican Party. But I have to say, as an advocate, as a human rights attorney working with Democrats and Republicans, the commitment that both sides of the aisle have shown to ending child trafficking has been really fundamental and amazing to bear witness to. So I am hopeful.
Well, if anything should be nonpartisan, even in Washington, it should be this. This should not be partisan football, and we ought to shame and disdain anybody who tries to make it such.
Yeah, well, we are hopeful that this bipartisan measure is passed. I wanted to go to our audience and see if folks have any questions for the senator.
Excluding my staff.
Somebody's got to have a question. There we go.
I don't have a question. It's more of a statement. I said I don't have a question. It's just merely a statement. I just want to applaud you for your leadership. I'm Gloria Terry with the Texas Council on Family Violence, and you have been such an advocate for those that are marginalized and victimized. That I just want to thank you for the work that you do and the leadership that you convey to members in Congress.
Well, to me, the best thing about being a United States Senator is occasionally you can do some things to help people. And this is one example, I hope.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Other questions?
There we go.
Can you give some specific examples of number 2, enhancing law enforcement tools? Or do you have any in mind that you're?
Well, what we're talking about there is additional authorities, primarily in the wiretap field, for example. This is really what I would call more of a technical correction, but just to make sure that there aren't any, that human trafficking is not somehow carved out as a safe zone when it comes to investigating these crimes. And of course, the idea of rescuing the victims, that is treating them as victims, not as the criminal themselves, and making sure that this fund that will be created from these fines and penalties is available to get them the help they need. There's a number of wonderful organizations and people in every community across Texas and across the country who care passionately about these victims and want to help. But usually they don't have the resources to do it. And part of what this will do is begin to provide that fund, not from tax dollars, but from penalties and fines paid by the people who now operate with virtual impunity, and to take that money and to help target the victims through the big-hearted people and organizations who are there ready and willing to help if they can just get the resources to do it.
Part of the resources that is sincerely lacking in not just the state of Texas, but all of the United States is beds, it's housing, it's shelters. We may all have big hearts. It is not exactly okay to put DMSTs in RC rape crisis centers or domestic violence shelters. For a number of reasons, it's not really okay to house them in juvie justice systems. So what I mean, juvenile detention. So what I want to know is when we say we're going to direct resources, these resources to me have to be almost holistic. And for kids who have been sincerely abused in every way, shape, or form, to give them some hope of what a future may be for them, because most of them are stuck like at 3 years old.
Well, and as you know, some of them are runaways. Some of them are been in foster homes, or some of them think they're in love with their pimp, and they don't realize that they're being exploited. And so the first thing they need, I think, is to understand their situation. But you're right; it's something of it so as basic as a safe place to sleep, and somebody to talk to, and security.
Why isn't law enforcement referring? The state of Texas has done such a good job educating law enforcement that law enforcement is now like, okay, we know where do we put the victims, and there's nowhere to put them.
Yes.
Well, this $30 million will admittedly be a drop in the bucket. But as I think Mother Teresa said, when an ocean is made up of drops, and what we need to do is deal with these one case at a time, one child at a time, in a way that hopefully will allow us to make a big dent.
Thank you. Other questions?
Yes, Senator Gordon. There are a lot of diverse organizations doing a lot of really good things here. There are organizations setting up safe houses, rescue services, education, so on and so forth. Efforts are being made to have kind of a national clearinghouse to link all of that together, because right now a lot of these organizations are grassroots efforts to raise funds from local communities,
right,
but not having resources to a national network that would allow the organizations to grow.
Well, that's a great point, Mike. I don't know, Malika, what if you are somebody looking for help, where would you go? Other than pick up the phone and call the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, or safe place, or some local organization? How would they access that? Can we do better?
Yeah, no, and we have, as you said, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children and the hotline. The truth is that because we have so few services for children who are being bought and sold, that I wish we could have a clearinghouse, right? I wish we got to that level of need and availability of services. Unfortunately, when we're talking about trafficked children who are American-born, especially coming out of the foster care system, there are so few programs that it doesn't even rise to the need of a national clearinghouse. Certainly, though, when we look at all trafficked services, there is that need, and I think the hotline has been very good in being able to connect the calls coming to the hotline with services. But this is a new issue for us, right? I mean, the issue of children being trafficked in this country is one that we are wrapping ourselves around and trying to figure out every single day. So I think the idea of what other national entities can be created so that we can have a seamless continuum of services is a real need. Seeing that we have 2 minutes left, but another question?
So I'm Sergeant Grayson, San Antonio Police Department. So to follow up on the conversation about shelters, of the 150 so investigations I've been involved with trafficking, the kids will go to shelters, but the problem is they have to choose to stay there. Every kid I've known, they've run away. As soon as they get there, they recruit other kids to go with them. Is there any talks going on as a way of keeping the kids in a shelter to get them the services they need so they can start healing?
Well, it certainly is a problem because, as I said earlier, many of them don't consider themselves victims. And until it's too late, until they realize they can't escape. I don't know whether and perhaps somebody here in the audience would know, but I don't know whether a juvenile court judge would have the authority. I presume they would to restrain them. But to your point earlier, where do they put them? They put them in jail. If they put them in an open setting at a local facility, somebody wants to provide a bed and a safe place for them, there's nothing that constrains them from staying and running away. That's part of the paradox, I think, of this particular crime, that people don't necessarily consider themselves the victim, and when you're trying to help them, then they run away from you and make it even harder. That's something we need to think about maybe a little bit more and see if we can come up with some creative solutions, because I think you're right.
And you do have wonderful models where, when it's trauma-informed, small programs, where the programs don't look like group homes, which is often what the girls are running from. When you have small trauma-informed programs, you have better outcomes. And that's why we love the JVTA, because we want the funding to be able to create those small trauma-informed programs so that girls don't run. Okay, so we are going to give you another thank you for your magnificent leadership.
Thanks, Monica. Thank you.
We're going to do a quick change of the setup here and bring on our next panel. I'm not, okay. Can everybody come back and sit down?
Okay.
I'm not, yeah. Nobody's listening. Oh, I see what you're saying. Thank you. Is that better? I don't. Can we get everybody to come back to their seats, please? I need a man's voice. You got to do it. You got to get people back. You have a commanding man's voice. You need a commanding man's voice.
Ladies and gentlemen, I think we're going to begin with the second panel.
That's what I'm talking about. Yeah, they're not.
Everybody's attention. I think we're going to begin for the second panel. I think everybody could take their seats again, please.
So if we talk about child trafficking and really the trafficking of children and adults as an example of modern day slavery, the folks up here are part of creating the digital underground railroad so that there are opportunities for safe passage and freedom for those who are enslaved. And what we're going to do with this panel is to really map that out for you all, to talk about the ways that technology can be harnessed, technology can be used towards the protection and support, and ultimately also the freedom for those who are being bought and sold. We have with us Angela Ahmed from the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, Vanessa Chauhan from the Polaris Project, and Sarah Gardner from Thorn. Each of them is going to do a brief presentation around the work that their organization is advancing, and then we're going to have a Q&A about that work.
Thank you so much. Like she said, I am Angela Ahmed. I'm with the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, and I am the program manager for the Special Analysis Unit, which houses the child sex trafficking team. So we'll go ahead and get started. And for those of you who are not familiar with the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, or with NECMEC, as we so succinctly call it, we are a nonprofit organization that was established in 1984. We are the National Clearinghouse. We are mandated by Congress to perform 22 specific tasks relating to the support of law enforcement, families, and organizations who are supporting those families regarding these specific tasks of working with missing and exploited children. So with that said, we'll go ahead and get into the issue that is at hand today. And what we know is that this is often a missing child issue, the issue of child sex trafficking. We know that obviously these victims do not all have to be missing, but we know that what we see from our cases that we're intaking is that we're able to identify, as a national clearinghouse, the patterns and trends that we're able to see with this data. So one of the big things that we do, one of the main tasks that we do, is intake these missing child cases and provide technical assistance, analytical assistance, and have providing recovery planning for these kids and for law enforcement and for families for when these children are located. And we know that what we see every year consistently is that the overwhelming majority of kids who are reported missing to us are what we call endangered runaways. And we know that this is also the category of missing child that is overwhelmingly the ones that are targeted by these traffickers to get them into and be involved with this crime, unfortunately. And we know that of that percentage, we are continuing to see a rising trend of the rate of kids who are endangered runaways who are also victims of child sex trafficking. And so we know over the past couple of years, when we started actually collecting the data and culling that data, what we've seen is that it has risen over the last couple of years from 1 in 8 now to 1 in 6. And so that seems to be a trend that is continuing. We know it's a rising problem. We know also that there is more awareness in the field. There's also awareness at our organization with how we're collecting that information as well. But we know that technology is used, consistently by these traffickers to recruit and coerce, and also to keep tabs on these victims while they are in their clutches. So what we try to do at the National Center is to take that technology and use it for good. And we do that in a variety of ways, one of them being by having the cyber tip line, which is the authorized reporting mechanism for child sexual exploitation. So obviously within that is going to be child sex trafficking. Also, we know that there are other crimes that often overlap with child sex trafficking, often child pornography. Their trafficker may take images of this child and then use them against that child later, threatening them to tell their family or show these pictures to their families or to their friends, online enticement, and also child sex tourism. And so we see that overlap. And this cyber tip line has received over 3 million reports to date, 1 million of those last year alone. And so we're getting reports from the public and from electronic service providers, including Google, who are providing information to us that then we are able to add value to with our analytical teams to get that information out to law enforcement in the field, to support their investigations, and to turn around this technology that these traffickers are utilizing for their business, to advertise their business, because it is about the money. Unfortunately, it is a business. And like Malika spoke about, these kids are labeled as their trafficker's property. We know it's a business, and we know that without the buyers and the demand, that this would not be something that would be continuing to be able to be happening. We know that there are buyers who are willing to purchase not only a human being, but specifically a child for the purpose of sex. And so this is going to continue while these things are happening. And so with the cyber tip line, we're getting that information out to law enforcement. We're also working very closely with law enforcement, specifically with the FBI and the Department of Justice's Child Exploitation and Obscenity section on the Innocence Lost National Initiative. And that was created in 2003. And one way that you may have heard about this initiative and may not have even realized it is regarding all the press that comes out regarding Operation Cross Country. And that was last year. It was a week-long nationwide investigation, a sting that is coordinated by the FBI with local and state law enforcement agencies as well. And they were able to do this operation last year in over 106 cities. And at the end of it, they had located over 168 child victims and 181 traffickers. I think that's pretty impressive. And I think one thing that the public and the media often kind of gloms onto is how, wow, look at that. In 1 week, this was a huge operation, and it absolutely is. But it highlights how this crime is occurring every day in every city and every location across the country. And so we know that it's happening year round. And that really just kind of highlights a snapshot of how this crime is occurring every day on a daily basis. So I want to go over very quickly before I pass on the mic to my colleagues, the role of technology and how the National Center is using it for good. And so one of the things that we see when we're working with law enforcement is we know that when they're in the field and they are working with these victims, as it was said before, a lot of times these kids don't see themselves as victims. They're not going to be disclosing, one, that they're a minor, and two, that they are a victim of child sex trafficking or any other type of abuse, because they have been through, other physical abuse as well at the hands of their traffickers. And so when law enforcement has these victims and they're not disclosing their actual age or that they are a victim, then they need to contact us and say, okay, we have this individual, here's the information that they're providing. Can you figure out and try to link that to images that we have and information that we have at the National Center of missing children who are intaked with us, to see if we can match that up and identify this child. So we're doing that, like I said, through the victim identification, and then we're supporting law enforcement out in the field. We're also doing what's called link analysis, and that is aside from, or as well as the trying to link kids, missing kids that we have intaked with kids that are being contacted by law enforcement. We're also looking at images and trying to link traffickers as well. We can support law enforcement in the field with their investigations into the buyers. Also, whatever information that they have that they are providing to us, we can start running those searches. If we have a phone number, maybe for a buyer who is provided to us, we can start running and seeing what we find. Maybe this person happens to be a convicted sex offender as well. Maybe this person is listed in our system. You know, like I said, we have over 3 million cyber tip line reports. Maybe they've been reported to us before for this very crime, or maybe some other type of child sexual exploitation, and that can be very helpful as well. So then I mentioned the image analysis where we're able to try to compare. We're also not only comparing, you know, the facial features and so forth of the kids that law enforcement is contacting us about, but we're also looking at the images that we're getting of physical identifiers. So, you know, tattoos and so forth that we're able to see in online ads and that law enforcement might be sending to us as specific identifiers. We're able to do that comparison as well with our analytical team. So to wrap up very quickly, I'm going to touch briefly on the two last aspects of education and prevention. And so we know that technology is used every day, as it's been mentioned, you know, by the criminals, but then we're also kind of turning it around on them and continuing to use it for good. And we're doing that with education. I mean, the fact that this is being live streamed and that we're going to be able to reach even more people with this event, that's education right there. So we're using it, we're broadcasting this out, and we're getting that out, getting that awareness out to other people. And we're also using this for empowerment and awareness for possible victims. So doing that prevention piece and being able to take this technology and provide it to possible victims, to these young kids, so that they are empowered, they know what to look for, they know to be wary and to not trust everyone online or all those people that they may be meeting, and recognize those signs, if not for themselves, then maybe for a friend. You know, I think that my friend actually might be the victim of child sex trafficking, and being able to have that knowledge, and we always say knowledge is power, and being able to then report that to law enforcement. So, you know, like I said, we are doing on a daily basis the opposite with technology that the criminals are. And one thing I'd like to kind of circle back to what Malika mentioned earlier, you know, the National Center, we're all about hope, and we're all about doing the good, and we're all about recovering and providing those services to children and families who need it, and supporting law enforcement in the field. And, you know, with my, you know, colleagues here, you know, with Polaris and with Thorn as well, you know, we're all working together to do exactly that, to provide those services. So thank you to Google and the McCain Institute and Rights for Girls for including the National Center and the panel. And I look forward to the conversation as it evolves as we go forward on this issue. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. I am Vanessa Chauhan, and I am a regional specialist with the National Human Trafficking Resource Center, which is a program of Polaris. So as you all know, Polaris is a nonprofit based out of Washington, D.C., and works on all forms of trafficking involving all victims. I specifically call the National Hotline my home. It's been my home for the past 5 years. So I'll talk to you a little bit about how we on the hotline are using technology to help victims and survivors, and what some of the other programs at Polaris are also doing with regards to technology. So the National Hotline has been in existence since December 7, 2007. It's operated by Polaris, but we receive 40% of our funding from the Department of Health and Human Services. We started off primarily as a phone-based hotline, so we're a 24-hour, year-round hotline that's available to anyone toll-free. We introduced email as well as online reporting, similar to the cyber tip form, so people can log onto our website and report tips anonymously or reach out for help as well. In January 2013, we partnered with Thorn to introduce the Polaris Be Free texting line. And it's the Polaris line because that's not funded by HHS currently. And the texting line has been a fantastic tool for us to be able to reach minors specifically and young adults. So we on the National Hotline, we're not a mandated reporter. We do follow mandated reporting guidelines. So if we hear of a minor that's being actively abused, we are reporting those to law enforcement, similar to a mandated reporter. But what the texting line gives us is a platform to be able to really build relationships with minors, to really build relationships with the victims that are reaching out for help, give them a space to be able to really tell their story and tell us exactly what their needs are so we can better assess for what services and what organizations to connect them to in their locality. So it's been a fantastic resource. In addition to it being a tool for us to be able to access youth, it's also been great for all victims, since that is something that's part of what they do in their daily lives. They always have access to a phone. And so they're able to tell us if a trafficking situation is happening right now and if they want help right now. I've texted with individuals who have been recruited and have been told that they're going to be forced into commercial sex. And as they're being driven to their destination, have texted their locations, all of the landmarks that they're seeing, a lot of the exits that they're seeing. So we're able to coordinate a response with Highway Patrol to be able to stop them or intercept them before they get to their destination. So it's been a fantastic tool for us as well. So on the hotline, we have started to build, or we have a database of over 3,000 resources, and we recently made that publicly available on our website to the public. So it's a portal that you can just access on our website. And we have, an audience member mentioned that there is a lack of beds. And so what we're trying to do is sort of identify both anti-trafficking specific providers as well as related field providers to really get a sense of what services are there for victims and survivors of trafficking. Malika earlier mentioned victims being branded by tattoos. So as we're filling this referral database, we're thinking outside of the box. We're looking at both short-term services, long-term services, and services that extend beyond mental health, counseling, shelter, medical, but we've now been able to compile a list of tattoo removal artists who are able to provide their services pro bono, because that's become a need for a lot of service providers working with survivors as they're helping them transition into recovery. So we are definitely thinking outside of the box. If you are a service provider, if you know of any service providers, please reach out to me, and I'm happy to get you access to our referral directory so we can let people know. So what you're seeing here is a map that's been generated through Palantir, and we've formed a partnership with Palantir to be able to incorporate our referral directory into our work. So as call specialists are taking calls, within minutes of finding out where the caller is calling from, we're able to use this Palantir technology to really be able to identify the best resource for them available in their locality. Before we had Palantir, it was just merely going through our database, and if it was some random town in a state, we were connecting them to their nearest big city. And what this allows us to do is really hone in into what services are immediately accessible or accessible within a very short period of time. So what you're seeing here is protocols, and there are about 219 individualized protocols, and this is what I do on a daily basis. So we've divided the country up into several regions that are managed by 4 regional specialists. So I have a portfolio of 13 states, from Montana through, the biggest one, from Montana through Minnesota all the way down to Texas. And it's my job to identify local stakeholders working on the issue of human trafficking, so that our call specialists that are speaking to the callers on a daily basis have an idea of who the law enforcement individuals are, and then who the service providers are. We do facilitate crisis coordination, so we connect with 24-hour law enforcement contacts as well as service providers to be able to provide those immediate emergency services. And so these protocols represent all of the relationships that we've built. As you can see, there's still a lot of work to be done because the ones that are just one single color represent a statewide protocol. And so we're trying to get as local as possible. It's not working. Additionally, with the help of Palantir and our database, so we use Salesforce, and we log all of the calls that we take on the hotline. And what that helps us do is help us map out what trafficking looks like, both across the country as well as in individualized communities. It helps us track trends. It helps us see if we're seeing calls referencing the same establishments, the same traffickers, and we're better able to understand networks. We're also better able to identify gaps in services. So where do we have very good infrastructure to deal or to handle trafficking cases, and where is there still a lot of work to be done, and who can we partner with there? Not every state has an anti-trafficking specific provider, so we're looking out to related fields to provide that service. We're working with local stakeholders to really get the word out about the national hotline and to really get awareness about the issue of trafficking so that people are calling in the tips, people are receiving the assistance that they want, and they're getting connected to the right people. So we stopped working. I did generate some stats for you for Texas, and our database system allows us to do that as well. So if you're interested in Texas-specific stats, so this is a heat map to identify that we've received calls from all over the country. This is largely dependent, and it reflects both people's awareness and knowledge of the national hotline, and we rely a lot on community stakeholders to really spread the word about our hotline. And as you can see there, we have received calls from all over the country. We just need to get the word out, both about the issue of trafficking and our hotline. And so I ran some stats for Texas. Texas is our second highest call volume state. You're always trailing behind California, but you're always vying for first place. We get a significant number of calls from Texas. From Austin specifically, we've received 608 calls so far. And these vary. People looking to learn more about trafficking, wanting to know how to get involved. These are people calling in tips about trafficking, which we then assess for trafficking and report to law enforcement. These are calls from individuals in a trafficking situation requesting immediate help or requesting access to services, or family members or individuals close to them that are also trying to access help for them. So we're trying to map out all of the organizations. We've seen a large amount of sex and labor. I wasn't able to pull the minor stats for you, but if anyone is interested, I'm happy to run those for you when I get back. So that's a little bit about what we're doing on the hotline end of things. I wanted to talk to you a little bit about what Polaris and some of the other departments are doing. So we recently launched our data analysis program. And what they're doing is they've realized that we've been sitting on 7+ years worth of data. And data is something that's extremely essential in this field. People want to know, what does trafficking look like in my state? Show me the numbers, and then I'll show you the resources. And so what this is helping us do is use the data that we're receiving on our hotline, using a lot of internet search engines and a lot of publicly available databases to paint a picture about some of the networks of trafficking. So we're focusing on labor trafficking networks as well as sex trafficking networks, and trying to learn as much about them as possible. Trends, trying to get at the hierarchy of each network, trying to see how far it extends, whether it's just sort of a national network, whether there's a global element to it, and then hopefully gather enough intel about them so that we can design campaigns towards eradication. So the idea being that we've made all of these relationships with key stakeholders in each of these communities, and how can we give them a package to then help towards eradication. This is what we've gathered. This is the intel that we've learned. here you go. How can we help you get rid of some of these networks? So commercial front brothels, things like that. We're now digging deeper, so to speak, to learn more about how to get at eradication. And then on the global end of things, in the introduction, with the help of Google, we are now trying to expand. We're trying to get an understanding of who else in the world works on the issue of trafficking with the attempt to create a global safety net. So we're trying to identify, similar to what we did on the national level, with the help of certain partnerships, we've been able to create a global modern slavery directory, which is also publicly accessible, to get a sense of what other hotlines are out there across the world, what other international organizations are out there. Because on the hotline, even though we're a national hotline, we're still getting calls about trafficking occurring overseas. So we'd like to duplicate or at least extend what we're doing at the national level into the global arena. And then we're also doing a lot of training and technical assistance based on the expertise that we've been able to glean from the national hotline. So we're going out and training other hotlines. We're going to help them either start up their own state hotline or national hotline, or help them elevate their current work that they're doing. A lot of child help hotlines where there's a robust infrastructure globally are incorporating trafficking into their work. And so we're just trying to build a global safety net. So I think I'll stop there because I could talk forever. But
That was great. Thanks, Vanessa. I'm from California, so I like to hear that we're neck and neck with Texas in terms of stats. I'll report back. My name is Sarah Gardner, and I'm the Director of Development at Thorn. Our mission is to drive technology innovation to combat child sexual exploitation. So that's kind of a mouthful, and so I'd rather kind of dive into what that actually means. And then I think because you two gave such great presentations about how technology can be leveraged, I'd like to kind of pose some questions too about what we're worried about and why this is so urgent. Because I think we can all recognize it needs to be used now. But what we're concerned with is what's going to happen 2 years, 5 years, 10 years down the line. This morning, I actually went on Austin Backpage into the escort sections, which I really don't like to do. And by 11:35 a.m., there were 61 ads posted, which is not unique to Austin. We know that there's 40,000 ads posted on Backpage a week on average. So I think we get a sense that this is a data problem, as you both mentioned. But also, this really scary thing is that this digital footprint of these kids may be our last lifeline or potential chance of communication or even seeing them, so to speak. So you've heard, just like so many other businesses in the United States, trafficking has gone online. That's also made it much more invisible. So you don't have kids walking around on the street as much. It's had the double effect of the kids being then away in hotel rooms and the buyers much more willing to participate because they no longer have to drive around and pick someone up in their car. And we've spent about 2.5, 3 years interviewing survivors of sex trafficking in the United States, all of whom were originally trafficked as minors, and heard about their day-to-day. And it involved waking up, sitting in a hotel room, posting their ad online, having a customer posting their ad again online so it was at the top of the queue, seeing another customer posting their ad again online. So, and then in between then, they're texting with buyers and their pimp and potential buyers, Johns. So these forms of communication may be our only hope in understanding where they are and where they're going. Our challenge, so we saw that as an opportunity, we also saw it as a challenge. So what we did was we took that question to a cognitive computing company named Digital Reasoning, who worked on terrorism, and said, can you build algorithms that will help ingest all of this data online and create a pointer for first responders and for law enforcement so that when they go to do an operation, and I feel funny even mentioning this because I know there's 2 officers working on this issue right here in Austin here today that could speak to this much much better than I can, but you can immediately find those high-risk ads of all those ads posted, and that reduces the amount of time it takes to then go and set up a sting and try and come in contact with that individual. So, as the senator said, it may take a few times getting in front of these kids for them to say, yeah, I want to get out of this situation, and say those 5 to 7 moments originally happened over the course of a few years. Can we, using technology, make those 5 to 7 moments happen over a few weeks? And that's critical because we've known that the less time a kid spends or a young adult spends in this situation, the much more likely that they're then able to recover. It doesn't mean it's easy, but it means that they have a much better shot. So this idea, we spent about 2 years testing, and then with an investment from Google and McCain Institute, and I mentioned that because people brought up resources, and I think that's really important to point out that Google and the McCain Institute have put real resources behind a lot of the tools that we've been talking about today. We were able to build the tool, which is now in beta. It's been having really great results. In February, a 15-year-old girl who met her pimp online in a chat room left her Catholic high school with him one day. He picked her up from school and drove off with her and revealed to her that he was in fact a guerrilla pimp, which, as some of you I know working on this issue know, is sort of the most violent type of pimp who uses abuse, like hardcore violence to control their victims. And she was all of a sudden went from living at home and being at school in this situation in a matter of hours. NCMEC got a report from her family about this missing child. And within, I think, like a few days, an officer in San Jose had heard about this case, and luckily they did have her phone number, and they popped it into Spotlight, and they were able to see all the posts that she had already posted. And the sad thing is she'd been posted like 15 or 20 times in a matter of like 2 weeks. She'd even gone down to Fresno and then back up. So he was able to set up a sting with her, a sting to go meet her the next day, and did, and she immediately identified as a victim. They arrested her pimp, who had been caught trafficking before in Orange County and was up in the Bay Area doing it again. He now faces up to 40 years in prison. And so this was just a case that was such a clear example. This kid could have, that whole process of finding her could have taken up to a year. But because there's tools like this that can now make these connections between ads, use a phone number to show, okay, this is related to this ad, and show the whole history of someone's trafficking situation online, as opposed to one moment in time, one ad at one time. It allows for a much better chance and likelihood of being able to come across the kids that are in really dire situations. So that's Spotlight, and NCMEC's a partner on that. And as Vanessa mentioned, we partnered with Polaris on Be Free, and that was like kind of a no-brainer, right? It's like, are kids gonna remember a 1-800 number, or are they gonna text? So they text, and so that's been wildly successful. But I guess I just wanted to talk a little bit about the future and what our mandate is as Thorn. So you heard that both these organizations have huge tasks, right? I mean, unbelievable amount of work to do, and they do a tremendous job of it. So what we see our role being as the lab to try and help innovate so that we can spin ideas off that work and hand them to these two organizations that are doing such tremendous work on the front lines. So we run a technology task force, which includes over 40 companies. Google has been a member for 4 years. And it means sitting in a room with about 40 engineers from all of these companies, no policy people in the room, no lawyers, on purpose. And we say, sorry, and there's like so many lawyers here who are my friends, so sorry, Sarah. Anyway, and we say, okay, here are the 5 major challenges that NCMEC is facing. Here are the challenges that Polaris is facing. What can we do? Like, how do we build on this? And what's really cool is that, you'd think like a Facebook engineer who's spending their day like fixing a little bug and something, like, are they going to care about this or not?
they love this because this is actually something that matters, right? This is like not, can you get this landing page to load faster? This is, can you help find a kid who's in a really bad situation? So they dive right in, and that's been really successful in terms of spinning out viable ideas. And then we kind of cross-reference those with law enforcement and say, is this going to be useful to you? And then we also get survivor input. That's key, because engineers will come up with crazy ideas like, let's just give every kid in foster care a beacon necklace, and you just push it and you're like, oh my gosh, yeah, okay. Like that kid's gonna wear that big beacon necklace and be like, hi, I'm the foster care. Yeah. So yeah, you gotta lead them, but if you lead them, they'll come up with some good stuff. So that's been really a great success, and one sort of our niche within this environment is to cultivate that relationship with the tech community. Lastly, in terms of where this is going, I'm sure some of you have read about Tor and anonymizing technologies and so forth. So we've heard of cases where, I mean, they're just dead cold. Like they have pictures of child abuse imagery, and all they have is the kid's face, right? There's like no metadata on the photos. There's no tracking. There's no GPS data. And this is the trend because perpetrators are smart. And they are the most motivated to hide their tracks. And so they're always the first ones out there pushing the envelope on, well, what if we did it this way? And then we'll take this off, and then we'll do this, and then we'll disrupt the hashing system by adding this element. So, you know, I don't know if you guys feel this way, but it's like you're always running behind them. We're trying to catch up. We're getting much closer. But the concern is that if the trend continues to go that way with both sex trafficking and child abuse imagery, we could be here in 10 years and be like, oh my gosh, we can't find anyone. So that's the sense of urgency around it, and why I think we're also committed to making sure that we think about technology as a way to fight this problem.
Thank you. I want to ask Angela and Sarah if, you know, part of the conversation with Senator Cornyn, and certainly part of the work that the senator has done, has been on addressing demand. And this whole issue of, you know, we have been successful at criminalizing the trafficker. I think we are beginning to recognize that we have to criminalize the buyer, and we have to address demand for child sex. If you all can talk about how might we use technology, right, to be able to go after the buyer and create an opportunity for buyer identification and arrest and prosecution.
Well, I'll go first on that, and then you can kind of build. You know, and you're exactly right. And just like I mentioned before, you know, if you take that demand away, I mean, this is a business. It's a criminal enterprise, and so it's really just math, which I'm not very good at, but I'm smart enough to be able to figure out that if you take away the demand, then this crime is going to decrease, and you're going to have, you know, less victims, and you're going to have people moving on to some other type of criminal activity, you know, unfortunately. But when you've got minor victims, you know, I would say that's a success. And so, you know, what we're then able to do, you know, similar to how we're assisting law enforcement in the field with identifying and locating and building more information on these traffickers, it's the same for these buyers. And so, you know, just like we were able to do for Operation Cross Country, we're doing that every day for smaller investigations, for, you know, case-by-case stuff, for ads that we're able to send out to law enforcement that are being reported to the cyber tip line. And so law enforcement is also proactively trying to address this issue as well. And so they're setting up those stings to get these buyers to show up, and where these people are showing up thinking that they were going to be paying for sex with a 13-year-old girl or boy, and they're meeting a team of highly qualified law enforcement officers who are more than happy to escort them to a place where they can stay for the evening, if not longer. And so we're taking that information, and like I mentioned before, you know, maybe we have a phone number, you know, if we're providing assistance, you know, on a weekend sting, and so we've got information coming in, you know, real time on an ad that law enforcement has put out there and said, okay, hey, you know, new in town, looking for, you know, action, this is where we're going to be, so forth, and letting people know that there are possible minor victims there for sale. And so then as that interest is kind of coming in and as law enforcement is setting up those dates, then they're able to provide that little information to us. You know, maybe it's a phone number, maybe it's a screen name, whatever it might be. And then we're able to start building that bigger kind of leads package and that picture of that individual so that law enforcement kind of knows what they're walking into when they go to meet this buyer. And so forewarned is forearmed. And so then they're able to get as much information as possible. If we can plug that number into public records, we can run some social networking searches. Like I mentioned before, if we can find that if there are additional reports to the cyber tip line, or we have additional information, maybe somehow this person was listed in a missing child case at some point, build all of that together and get it back out to law enforcement. So the same way that this buyer is utilizing technology to set up to commit this crime, then we're just turning it right around on its head and utilizing all of the resources that we have at our disposal to then get that information out to law enforcement. And then, you know, one of those resources, you know, like Sarah mentioned, is working with Thorn.
Yeah. Isn't it scary too how people will use their same like screen name to set up a meeting with a 13-year-old girl as will be like on their Facebook page?
I would say it's not scary. I would say that it's fantastic
Yeah, that's
for
true.
us. And
The
we will
dumb
all
ones.
capitalize on that lack of knowledge.
Yeah, no, that's true. I mean, it is kind of, it's amazing what people think is anonymous, right? So, I mean, that's the first, to me, that's the most important, because we've heard for many years, you know, if no one's getting arrested, then they're not worried, you know, that they're to not actually stop their behavior. They're like, oh, well, no one's gotten caught. So what we try and do is play off of that. So we went to law enforcement and said, you know, you guys are doing that really, really well. What can we do? And they said, can you design an online deterrence program that intercepts these people as they're online and basically sends them ads that say like, hello, we know what you're doing. We see you. If we can see you, so can law enforcement. And you better believe when you're looking for CP, that has great effect. We've served that ad, that warning message, hey, we know what you're doing, we can see what you're doing, to over 2 million people now. We've had one person read through the policy, the privacy policy at the bottom of that ad, and write us an email about how they were doing research on this issue. And I have to tell you, in order to get our ad, like, you have to look. It's not like you're Googling, or sorry, you're searching. Google's done actually an amazing job changing their algorithm, so you really can no longer Google it, but you can't. But if you're searching for something heinous, code words essentially that you and they have no meaning for us, but for the people in these worlds, they all know what they mean. So there's no way you could get, you know, these types of ads by accident. But that was what law enforcement asked us to do independently. And it's basically piggybacking off of just straight up ad retargeting. So when you go to the GAP's website and then it follows you around, that's what we're trying to do in that scenario, and follow them around so that they're scared. As one of our donors said, he's like, I want them to go burn their computer and never look for it again. And that would be a huge success, right? And then out of that, so the low-hanging fruit would be the people who that's enough to deter them. I should also say we offer help on those pages, and that's actually been the most successful landing page that people have clicked through the most, are the ones that say, has this been like an addiction that you've struggled with your whole life? Do you actually want to get help? And that's like a whole nother can of worms about the differences of people in these environments, and hands-on abuse versus just consuming material and so forth. But so hopefully the two aligned, right, will start to really make people think twice.
So Vanessa, I had a question for you, but we don't have a lot of time left, and I really wanted folks from the audience to have a chance to ask any questions of the panel. So I'm going to throw it back to the audience. I don't even have time for that? I'm so sorry. Okay, well, thank you for your wonderful work. I apologize. And I'm going to ask Senator Cornyn to come back onto the stage and join us.
Well, this has been a great, great program, and thanks to Google and everybody who's made this possible. Thanks to Malika for talking us through this and serving as, in essence, the Master of Ceremonies. And I want to commend her for her great work and efforts with Rights for Girls. I also want to mention the McCain Institute and, of course, our host, Google, for their insight and their this insightful and important event here today. I know I've gotten a lot out of it myself. The way that Polaris Project, Thorn, and National Center for Missing and Exploited Children are using technology to combat sex trafficking is impressive, also very encouraging. As I said earlier, the Justice for Victims of Trafficking Act is desperately needed to help support the efforts of groups like those we heard from today, and a number of groups represented in the audience today as well. Luckily for me, there are many articulate voices out there spreading the message and calling on members of Congress to take up and pass the Justice for Victims of Trafficking Act as soon as possible. And I'm increasingly optimistic that we will do that soon. But don't take the pressure off yet. Ratchet it up until we get it done. And Austin happens to be home of one of the nation's strongest advocates in the fight to combat child sex trafficking and sexual violence, and that would be Brooke Axtell's home. Brooke is the Director of Communications and Engagement for Allies Against Slavery, a nonprofit devoted to ending human trafficking. She also founded Survivor Healing and Empowerment, a healing community for survivors of rape, abuse, and sex trafficking. As an advocate, Brooke supports survivors through their recovery process with a particular focus on creative expression, and has inspired others through her own writing and her own music. While some may have been introduced to Brooke through her moving performance at this year's Grammy Awards, I know she is a familiar face to many in this community. Through her work with organizations like my good friends at Safe Place and the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, and even the support she has shown to my colleague, Congressman Ted Poe's efforts on behalf of the legislation we're advancing, Brooke passionately shares her vision for healing and hope. So it's with great pleasure I welcome Brooke Axtell to the stage to conclude today's event and to further motivate us, all of us, to continue to fight to eradicate human trafficking and end sexual slavery in our time. Brooke?
Hello, thank you. It's an honor to be here and so encouraging to hear about the developments in technology that will help bring an end to the trafficking of children in the US. I am so thrilled that all of you have come together today to look at the ways that technology, which has been used to violently exploit children, can be reclaimed to create powerful social change and healing. Technology is a powerful catalyst. It has the capacity to create and the capacity to destroy. It can be used to depict and perpetuate the sexual exploitation of children. It can also be used to empower survivors by connecting them with the help they need for liberation and healing. As a survivor of child sex trafficking, I've found counseling through an online database that helped me connect with the closest sexual assault crisis center. The evolution of internet technology led me to free therapy, recovery groups, and the National Survivor Network, a community of over 100 human trafficking survivors who were exploited in the US and are now devoted to creating social change. I communicate with women in our online forum every week. It is through this inspiring network that I've heard countless stories of women and girls being sold for sex over the internet. Stories similar to my own. When I was 7 years old, I was trafficked by my nanny in Dallas, Texas. While my mother was severely ill in the hospital, he raped and sold me to other men for sex. I was subjected to child pornography and the most sadistic forms of exploitation. As I endured this trauma, my one desire was for someone to rescue me and take me to a safe place. In my terror and shame, I didn't disclose my abuse. But when my mom finally returned from the hospital, she sensed that something was wrong. She trusted her intuition and fired my nanny. Although I had a loving family, I was too young to understand and voice what was happening to me. It took me many years to find healing. I now offer my voice to the children who are still being bought and sold in the US. I am fiercely devoted to freedom. I see my trauma as a form of knowledge, a knowledge I have transformed into the power of compassion. My experience of human trafficking was a brutal initiation into that truth. But I have emerged to tell you that this is happening every day, and we need your help. As you have heard today, this is not just happening overseas. This is not just happening to international victims who are brought in from other countries. In fact, 83% of confirmed sex trafficking victims in our nation are US citizens. Human trafficking depends on secrecy and concealment. It is time for us to use technology to bring the industry into the light. When we illuminate the darkness and voice what we find there, the darkness no longer has power. Facing the truth is the beginning of freedom. When I engage in conversation with those who are first learning about the reality of child sex trafficking in the US, I am often asked, how does this happen here? First, we must acknowledge demand and the role the buyer plays in creating the market. 1 out of every 5 pornographic images is of a child. And 55% of child pornography comes from the US. The sale of child pornography in the US has become more than a $3 billion annual industry. Child pornography documents demand, evidence of a relentless appetite for child exploitation. Through my own experience of being forced into pornography and sex trafficking as a child, as well as the countless stories I have heard from other survivors, I have witnessed the dark side of technology. What happens when predators seize the opportunities afforded through innovation. Online communities, adult service ads, and social media have provided platforms that traffickers and buyers use to exponentially accelerate the rate of exploitation. In the recent case of a 15-year-old sex trafficking victim in San Antonio, a young girl was recruited, raped, photographed, and sold online within 48 hours of first meeting her pimp, who pretended to be her friend. One of her buyers was Raymond Valles, a former lieutenant colonel in the US Army. This is not happening at the fringes of society. This is rooted in the core of mainstream America. For those of us who love and care for children, this predatory behavior is incomprehensible. But it is important to remember that human trafficking is a highly lucrative business. And traffickers are always looking for new merchandise to sell. It is the second fastest growing criminal industry in the world, and approximately half of all trafficking victims globally are children. Allies Against Slavery has created several initiatives to address the issue of domestic minor sex trafficking. We recently launched our DMST working group here in Austin with over 20 stakeholders to build sustainable, strategic solutions to child sex trafficking in Texas. With key partners, we are identifying gaps in care for survivors across the continuum, from prevention to recovery and beyond, forming a citywide action plan that will guide our work and hold us accountable to making Austin a slave-free city. Toward this end, we are also collaborating with the University of Texas and our Texas Slavery Mapping Project, a 2-year in-depth research project to document the prevalence and impact of human trafficking in our state. This will continue to inform our support for survivors of sex trafficking. Child sex trafficking is not just an assault on a child's body. It is also a violent assault on their core identity. A child who is being trafficked is being told through both words and actions that they are worthless, powerless, and unloved. We are all here today to take a stand against this tide of lies, to channel our voices, our energy, and our gifts to bring an end to child sexual exploitation, to show children the truth of who they are, unconditionally valuable and worthy of love. If you are committed to ending child sex trafficking, I encourage you to join Allies Against Slavery for our upcoming Slave Free City Summit, a cutting-edge conference, April 17th and 18th, devoted to creating solutions to this devastating injustice. We are bringing in some of the most prominent survivor leaders, experts, and authors to empower our community to move collective compassion into unified action until all children are free. I invite you to join me. Thank you.